All right, today we're diving into something pretty fascinating, a deadly condition that takes our body's flexible, life-giving arteries and turns them into rigid, dangerous pipes. And trust me, the story is way more surprising than you think. In basic physics, we all learn that pressure drops as a fluid flows through a pipe, right? Friction and all that. But take a look at this diagram of a healthy artery. That peak pressure, the systolic pressure, is actually higher at the end than it was at the beginning. Now look at the old, calcified artery. It does exactly what we'd expect. The pressure drops. So what on earth is going on here? This isn't just some weird trivia. Figuring out this paradox is the key to understanding a killer disease. To get to the bottom of this, we've got to update how we think about our arteries. So forget simple plumbing. These are living, dynamic structures. Yeah, the common assumption is that they're just passive tubes. Blood goes in one end, comes out the other, and it loses a little bit of pressure along the way. But that view, well, it's just not the whole story, not even close. And the condition that really shatters this simple idea is called medial arterial calcification, or MAC for short. This is where calcium phosphate literally hardens the muscular middle layer of the artery. Now, this isn't the same as the plaque buildup you hear about with heart attacks. This is the pipe itself turning rigid and stiff. And that stiffening is what brings us right back to our central mystery, the pressure paradox. Let's really dig into why it has such a strange, counterintuitive effect. Okay, check this out. You can see the two totally different behaviors right here, side by side. On the left, the calcified artery, you see a clear drop in that peak pressure wave. Makes perfect sense. But now look at the healthy artery on the right. It's doing the complete opposite. It's a phenomenon called systolic amplification. The pressure pulse actually gets taller as it travels down the artery. Right? This should make you stop and go, wait a minute, how is that even possible? It feels like it completely defies the basic laws of fluid dynamics we all kind of get. But the answer isn't in the blood. It's in the pipe itself. The difference, it turns out, all comes down to the mechanical properties of the artery wall, specifically how it stretches and reacts to every single pulse of blood that comes from the heart. The secret ingredient here is a property called hyperelasticity. Now, unlike a simple rubber band, living tissues like our arteries have this really complex stretchiness. They can expand to soak up the energy from a pressure wave and then snap back, adding that stored energy right back into the flow. And you can see that difference so clearly on this graph. The blue line, that's the healthy artery. As pressure goes up, its area expands a lot. It's compliant, it's flexible. Now look at the red line, the calcified one. You can crank up the pressure, but its area barely changes at all. It's lost its stretchiness and become just a rigid tube. So let's just boil it down. It's all summarized right here. Healthy arteries are stretchy and compliant. That lets them dilate and actually amplify that systolic pressure wave. Calcified arteries, on the other hand, are stiff and non-compliant. They can't expand, so they just absorb and dampen the wave, which causes the pressure to drop. The best analogy I've heard for this is a flexible garden hose versus a rigid metal pipe. If you send a quick pulse of water down a garden hose, you can see the wave travel and even kind of whip at the end, right? It amplifies the force. But try that with a metal pipe, and the wave just fizzles out, losing energy. Our healthy arteries act just like that flexible hose. And this whole idea of arteries being more than simple pipes, well, it's led scientists to some other pretty mind-bending discoveries. Mathematical models have shown another weird behavior, and this one has to do with swelling inside the artery wall. Okay, so here's a question that seems to have a really obvious answer. If the inner layer of an artery swells up from, say, inflammation, the opening for blood, it has to get smaller, right? I mean, more tissue means less space for blood to flow. Well, common sense screams yes, of course. But the advanced scientific models, they tell a much more complicated story. It turns out what actually happens depends on how the swelling changes the stiffness of that swollen tissue. Yeah, the research basically says it's not what you'd expect. The models show that if that inner layer becomes super soft and squishy as it swells, the pressure from the outer layers can actually cause it to collapse inward. So paradoxically, the opening can shrink even more dramatically than you'd think just from the swelling alone. It's wild. Okay, so we've been talking about some pretty abstract stuff, right? Mathematical models, hyperelasticity. Let's bring all of this back down to the human body and see why understanding these weird mechanics can literally be a matter of life and death. Because this is what's at stake. When arteries get stiff, they become way less efficient at moving blood, and that means the tissues downstream get starved of oxygen. This leads to something called ischemia, and eventually necrosis, which is just tissue death, like you can see happening in this patient's hand. This is the devastating, real-world cost of a pipe that has lost its flex. And the severity of ME isn't just about that one factor of stiffness. No, it's actually this battle of competing forces. So you have the calcification reducing flow. Then, at the same time, these tiny downstream vessels can start to close off, which ramps up resistance. Your body might even try to compensate by making the artery wider, which is called positive remodeling. And of course, high blood pressure just throws gasoline on the fire, adding more stress to the whole system. And this table, oh man, this is what makes diagnosing this disease an absolute puzzle for doctors. Just look at the outlet systolic pressure. Stiffening makes it drop, but arterial closures and remodeling can make it rise. So a doctor could take a pressure reading, see a number that looks totally normal, and completely miss the dangerous stiffening that's happening underneath. All these different factors are pulling the vital signs in opposite directions. And that's exactly why those mathematical models we've been talking about are so incredibly important. They let scientists simulate all of these competing effects, untangle the confusing signals, and figure out what's really going on inside that artery. It's all about finding a clear signature for a disease that is dangerously good at hiding. With every single pulse of blood, our arteries are telling a complex story, a story of pressure and elasticity, of stiffening and adaptation. The big challenge for medicine now is to get much, much better at listening to that story before it reaches its final tragic chapter.